The next style that people like to write with is the storyteller style. And I like to mention up front that even though you're telling a story, please God, don't make all the funny happen at the end of your story. The idea of a storytelling version of a joke when you're on stage as a stand-up comedian is to tell little mini punches and jokes along the way. And if you think of it like a fight, think of it as a jab, jab, punch, jab, jab, punch, jab, jab, punch, jab, jab, punch, uppercut. Every single line that you're saying along the way needs to have some sort of humor in line with it. One of my favorite storytellers, and again, I mentioned earlier in the series that he takes a lot of criticism, is Dane Cook. The guy is one of the greatest storytellers of all time. He gets a lot of criticism because he doesn't necessarily tell or write a standard punchline, but the way he tells a joke is unbelievable. Go look up some of his earlier stuff, and you'll see that he does a lot of writing, and then the further he gets in his career, the more he realizes he can deviate away from the standard writing that you see in maybe one-liners because he does such a good job of telling a story. Storytelling, of all the ways to write, are most about this emotional connection that we talk about. If you are not emotionally attached to your story in some way or another, we don't care. We only feel as much emotion as you do. And if you're up there telling a story third hand about something that happened that you weren't a part of, it's not going to be funny to us. So you get permission, if there's a really funny story that you know of that you weren't at, put yourself in it. Be one of the characters. Put yourself in the story. And in fact, the challenge in being funny on stage as a stand-up comedian is always look like the asshole. Always make yourself the bad person in the situation. If you become a comedian that writes jokes about how much you hate other people and making fun of other people and how stupid other people are, the audience will believe that you are talking about them. So if you can be vulnerable enough when you're telling your story to make the story about you, make it an embarrassing story, make it about possibly a very true story about something very embarrassing that happened to you that everybody laughed at except for you, that's the good stuff. That's what people pay money to come see. They don't want you to go on some type of a tirade about how ethical you are and how everybody else around you is an idiot or stupid or mean. Be the mean person. You'll know that you're telling an unfunny story if you have to start it with, here's a funny story, or if you end it with, it was so funny. People should be instantly engaged in your story the moment you begin to tell it. And the only way you can get people to jump in instantly is to shock them into it. You have to tell the story in such a way that the opening line, the way that you begin, engages them. And it can be simple. It doesn't have to be anything groundbreaking, but you can simply start a story by saying, let me tell you why I'm an idiot. And people will listen because they want to hear about something stupid you did, because it's probably something stupid that they did that they can relate to. They get to laugh at you and sit in their own security in the dark, drinking beers with their friends, laughing at you, while secretly inside going, I am that person. I do those same things. That's your job. Your job is to bring out all the familiarity, all the things that people can't quite verbalize. Say those things as you're creating that tension and then release it. That's your job. That's it. Your task as a storyteller comedian, for you to get familiar with it, is to write a 500-word story. It doesn't necessarily have to be funny. It just needs to be something that you're emotionally connected to. I really don't care if it's depressing, or if it's scary, or if it's anxious, or if it's a really fun and joyous moment of your life. You just need to write about something that you care about, and it's a story. And if you have a tough time getting started on whatever that story is, I'll give you your influence right now. So write a story about your favorite gift that you ever received for your birthday. And if that's not enough to go on, write a story about a time that something very embarrassing happened to you in grade school. And your last suggestion, if you're having a tough time writing a story, which you can write about anything, is tell a story about the first time you asked out somebody on a date. Those should be 3 things that should spark some ideas for you to write a story. Doesn't need to be funny, it just needs to be true. And the reason why it needs to be true is you're going to come back to that and extract a lot of details that you can pull from it. And it's really difficult to create details when your story isn't true. Your second task, now that you've written your 500-word story, is to go back into that story and read it as though you are a third person, as though you're an objective observer, as though you had handed this to a stranger, someone that does not know you. Read through that story and figure out the most interesting parts of that story that you'd like to know more about, and extract those parts and set them to the side. If you believe that the story that you wrote seems comical already, rewrite that story and make a space in between each one of the lines so that when you go back through to edit that story, you can start to add little mini punchlines or little mini setup punches or little tangents in the story that you can write back in. So if everything is handwritten, just have a piece of paper that you can either tape along the side of what you just wrote and point arrows to where you'd like to insert these things. Obviously, if it's written on a computer, you can just create space in between, create a new font or a new color or highlight, whatever it is that you're comfortable with, and begin to make bookmarks or spaces where you can insert new little jokes. The third task that I want you to get into with this story is to begin to find moments where you can create a small joke or a little jab, if you will. So a setup and a punch and a setup and a punch. So for example, you might be telling a story of the first time you asked somebody to prom, but you want to give us a little backstory on who you're asking. And so you can say that you met her in German class, and the German class's teacher name was Herr Douche. And so you want to tell just a little bit of a story or a little bit of a punch about Herr Douche and how everyone in the class thought it was hilarious to call him Herr Douche. And then you go back to talking about the person that you wanted to ask out to prom and how maybe she was a bit of a whore in high school. And so you start to talk about that a little bit. So your story may take a very long time to get to the actual point where you ask her to prom. But again, if you're watching these series in sequential order, nobody gives a shit about the story. They just want the funny. So use your story as a vehicle to create a myriad of jokes, of setups and punchlines all the way through. In fact, if you want to time it, your stories should yield somewhere between 7 laughs per minute. And you should have 1 laugh break every 5 to 10 minutes. And a laugh break is where you have to stop talking to allow people to continue to laugh. It's a pretty great feeling. One of the other things that I need to mention in storytelling is that if you can make the summary of your whole story 1 sentence or less, then you know what the most efficient way of telling your story is. There's no funny, there's no jokes, but you know that this is a story about the first time that I asked somebody to prom. You could edit that down. This is a story about asking someone to prom. You can't take out any more words from that. So you can expand and build from there, or you know that if you've got 500 words and you can condense it from 500 words down to that 1 sentence, that somewhere in between is your efficient story. Because I promise you, those 500 words you just wrote, you're probably only going to use 100 to 150 of them on stage. But all 500 words are really necessary to create this mound of vocabulary and this inventory so that you can whittle it away like a sculptor.